My sister, Clara, finally looked me in the eyes, her usually flawless face bare, completely devoid of makeup for the first time in perhaps a decade, and she didn't ask why I did it. She just asked how I could have been so cruel. Her voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the sound of her sobs, and in that moment I saw the true fragility of the empire she'd built, an empire I had just brought crashing down with $5 jar of petrolatum jelly, the miracle cream. That had become the cornerstone of her multi-million-dollar global skincare brand. The product she swore was the key to her perpetually luminous, glass-like skin, the very thing that had made her a celebrity and a skin goddess to millions, was, for the past 6 months, nothing but pure, unadulterated Vaseline. I was the one who performed the switch, a cold, calculated experiment to expose a lie that had festered within my family for 10 years, and which she was about to expand into a massive public deception. Was I wrong to take the secret she had used to build her perfect life and weaponize it against her, even if it meant destroying her brand, causing her divorce, and creating a permanent rift in my entire family? Tell me, honestly, if you would have done the same thing. To truly understand why I reached a point where I felt switching out my sister's proprietary, heavily guarded skincare cream with a tub of generic petroleum jelly was the only option, you have to understand Clara. She wasn't just my older sister. She was a phenomenon. From the moment she hit puberty, she was beautiful, effortlessly graceful, and, frankly, untouchable. I, on the other hand, was the shadow, quiet, bookish, prone to the kind of cystic acne that leaves deep, embarrassing scars. This wasn't a malicious rivalry, not at first. It was just the natural order of things in our house. Clara was the star, and I was her supportive audience. But the moment that truly set the stage for this decade-long deception, and ultimately my radical response, was her skin transformation when she was 22. She had struggled briefly with a terrible, inflammatory breakout, the kind that makes you want to hide in your room for months, and then, seemingly overnight, it vanished. It didn't just clear up. Her skin became flawless, poreless, radiant, and impossibly smooth. When people asked, she'd always give a vague answer about finally finding the right balance and listening to my body. But it wasn't until a few years later, when she launched her brand, Clara's Glow, that the real story, her story, crystallized into a public narrative. The product that launched her brand, the now infamous Renewal Night Cream, was marketed as the formula she developed during her struggle, a blend of ancient botanicals and proprietary peptides that unlocked her natural, perfect skin. It was a story of overcoming adversity, a skincare Cinderella story, and it made her millions. I was her first believer, her unpaid intern, her most loyal supporter. I worked on her early website. I helped ship the first batches from her tiny apartment, and I genuinely thought she was a genius for formulating something so effective. But as the brand exploded and Clara became this untouchable public figure, jet-setting, giving interviews and constantly talking about her miracle cream and her journey, a small, nagging doubt began to form in the quiet corners of my mind. The ingredients list on her cream, while impressive and sounding very scientific, didn't seem to account for the speed and totality of her original transformation. I was studying chemistry in university at the time, and I kept running hypotheticals. No natural product works that quickly and completely on severe inflammation. It just doesn't. Then, a chance encounter during a visit home solidified my suspicion into a certainty. I was helping her clean out a storage locker, the kind of dusty, forgotten space where you keep things you can't bear to throw away but don't want to look at, and tucked into an old, rusted metal vanity case from her college days, beneath a pile of expired lipsticks, I found it. a small, crumpled tube of a powerful, prescription-only topical corticosteroid. The kind that is never used for long periods because it can cause permanent skin thinning and pigment changes. But it will clear up almost any inflammatory skin condition in days. I recognized the brand name instantly. It was a prescription she would have needed from a dermatologist to combat an aggressive flare-up. The tube was almost empty. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. Her miracle wasn't a proprietary blend of peptides. It was a potent steroid that had effectively reset her skin, and she had built an entire career on the lie that her cream was the catalyst for the change. Her cream was, at best, a glorified, expensive moisturizer designed to maintain the skin barrier, allowing her to keep the narrative going. I didn't say anything immediately. The weight of this secret, the true scale of her deception, felt too immense to carry, let alone expose. She wasn't just lying to her customers. She was lying to my parents, to her husband, David, and she had even incorporated this origin story into her foundation's mission statement, claiming to help other young women find confidence through natural healing. I tried to convince myself that the cream still worked, that maybe the maintenance was the real genius, and the steroid was just a footnote from her past. But the lie kept growing, constantly inflating, and the hypocrisy became unbearable. When she announced a new, more expensive Elite Renewal line, promising to use the exact original formula from her personal journey, I knew I had to act. Her biggest claim was that her cream contained a key, secret botanical compound that was identical to what her body naturally produced. This was the moment I stopped being her brother and started thinking like the chemist I was training to be. I needed to prove that the core of her brand was inert. I needed to test the theory that all the heavy lifting in her flawless skin was now being done by simple luck, genetics, and a regimented diet and lifestyle, not by her cream. My plan had to be flawless, undetectable. I couldn't just tell people. I needed irrefutable visual proof that even Clara couldn't deny. I knew her routine intimately. She was obsessed with her night cream, applying it meticulously every single evening without fail, a ritual she even shared in her YouTube tutorials. She kept 2 jars on her vanity, one for immediate use and one untouched backup, both secured inside a temperature-controlled drawer, a level of paranoia that now seemed darkly comedic given what I was planning. I used a sophisticated, almost obsessive level of precision to execute the switch. I first bought a high-end, identical-looking glass jar, the kind she used, and filled it with pure, pharmaceutical-grade white petrolatum jelly Vaseline. It is odorless, inert, and structurally stable, the perfect placebo. Over the course of a weekend visit, under the guise of helping her reorganize her wellness closet, I engineered the swap. I waited until I knew David was downstairs and she was on a lengthy, unscripted live Q&A. I quickly and surgically emptied her active jar of the Renewal Night Cream, cleaned it meticulously, and refilled it with the pure Vaseline. I even ensured the surface texture looked precisely the same as a freshly opened jar. The original cream, the real one, I scraped into a smaller container for later analysis. The backup jar remained untouched, my insurance policy. I then disposed of my tools and the remnants, sealing the secret inside me, a cold knot of dread and determination. The next 6 months were an exercise in psychological torture for me. Every time I saw her on a screen, or spoke to her on the phone, or attended a family dinner where she radiated that Clara's glow, I was holding the knowledge that the source of her confidence was something I had manufactured. I watched her like a hawk, initially nothing happened. The first 2 months, her skin was perfect, which only reinforced my theory that the cream was mostly maintenance anyway. The third month, I thought I saw a slight dullness, a loss of that hyperluminosity, but I dismissed it as lighting or my own wishful thinking. By the 5th month, however, the changes were undeniable, though subtle enough that only someone looking for them would notice. Her pores, which had always been invisible, seemed slightly more pronounced, especially around her nose. She had a faint, persistent redness in her cheek area that her makeup was starting to struggle to fully conceal. She started wearing a heavier foundation, something she always publicly decried. David, her husband, a man utterly devoted to her and her brand, started to make subtle comments about her looking tired, which she always brushed off with a forced smile and a comment about her travel schedule. I watched her panic grow internally. She doubled down on her expensive facials, increased her water intake, and even brought in a new nutritionist, all while her only evening product, the one she truly believed was working her magic, was just basic, inert, white Vaseline. The irony was a cruel, bitter taste in my mouth, and I felt sick with the tension of waiting, but I couldn't stop. I had to see the lie collapse under its own weight before I could deliver the final blow. The breaking point was the launch of her Elite Renewal line, scheduled for the beginning of December. It was to be a major press event, held in a gorgeous, glass, walled loft in Manhattan, attended by beauty editors, investors, and all her major influencers. This was where she planned to officially announce the global expansion of her original miracle formula and, crucially, secure a final, massive round of private equity funding. If I let this happen, she would have successfully defrauded countless investors and expanded the lie to an exponentially larger audience, harming not just her customers, but the reputation of natural skincare everywhere, and I simply couldn't stand by. I knew David, who had mortgaged their future on this expansion, would be standing right beside her on that stage. My sister, Clara, was about to step onto the precipice of true corporate fraud, all built on a secret tube of prescription medication she used 10 years ago. I spent the 2 weeks leading up to the event meticulously preparing my evidence. I had the lab report confirming the original cream was mostly lanolin and filler, the photos of the prescription steroid tube, a timeline of her skin changes over the 6 months, and, most damningly, a small, elegant jar containing a sample of the substance she had been applying to her face every night. Pure, plain Vaseline, so that was the situation I was in. I had the smoking gun, the timeline, the jars of Vaseline, and the original steroid cream. I was about to walk into her biggest, most triumphant moment and shatter everything she'd built, not out of malice, but out of a desperate, twisted sense of justice for the honest person she used to be and for the countless people she was about to deceive. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through those glass doors and how I finally dropped the bomb, I want you to pause and comment below right now. If your own family member built their entire life, their public image, their fortune, and even their marriage on a destructive, selfish lie that was about to hurt countless people, would you have protected them by staying silent and letting them continue, or would you have exposed them, regardless of the consequences? Comment protect or expose, and tell me why. I had to make my choice, and I was about to live with the fallout forever. I arrived at the launch party late, blending into the back near the beverage bar, a small, sleek clutch bag containing my evidence tucked tightly under my arm. Clara was radiant on stage, though I could see the slight, almost frantic energy in her eyes, the way she kept touching her cheek, a nervous habit she'd developed recently. She was mid-speech, hitting all the familiar beats: the struggle, the breakthrough, the miracle of nature, and the power of the elite Renewal Night Cream. David stood next to her, looking every bit the proud, supportive husband and business partner. I knew I couldn't just shout it out. It had to be a surgical strike. I needed to hit the source of the money and the source of her trust. I slipped away from the main crowd and found Michael, the lead private equity investor, talking quietly with a marketing director near the balcony. I walked straight up to him, excused myself, and said, "Michael, I'm Clara's brother, and I have something you need to see before you sign that term sheet." His face, initially annoyed, shifted to caution as he looked at my expression. I led him to a quiet corner, pulled out the small container of the pure Vaseline, and placed it on a nearby table next to the lab report on the original cream. I started calmly, describing the initial steroid use, the lie, and the 6-month experiment for half a year. I told him, my voice shaking slightly but holding steady, "Clara has been applying this to her face, believing it to be her multi-million-dollar formula, and her skin has declined. The miracle is a decade-old chemical shortcut and a massive psychological placebo." I showed him the evidence of the steroid, the photos of the empty tube. I finished by saying, "I'm telling you this because I cannot let my sister commit fraud. This company is built on a lie that I have the physical proof to expose." Michael, a man who built his career on cold, hard data, didn't panic. He looked at the evidence, asked 2 concise questions about my access to her cream, and then, without another word, he walked directly up to David, not Clara. The conversation was short, sharp, and brutal. I watched David's face fall, then turn a sickly gray. He didn't even look at Clara. He just abruptly excused himself and walked off the stage, pulling her lead scientist, who looked terrified, with him. The launch instantly devolved into chaos. Clara, realizing David was gone and seeing Michael suddenly surrounded by his own legal team on the phone, looked over and finally spotted me. That was the moment she knew. Later that night, when she confronted me at her home, after the party had emptied and the investors had officially pulled their commitment, was when she asked how I could be so cruel. I didn't defend my action with rhetoric. I simply held up a new, pristine jar of the Renewal Night Cream and an identical jar of Vaseline. "Clara," I said, "you were willing to let David stake his entire future on a product that you knew was inert. You were willing to lie to the world to maintain the lie you started 10 years ago. The cruelty isn't what I did. The cruelty is what you were doing to everyone who ever believed in you. The aftermath was a hurricane that tore through our family." The company collapsed within weeks, unable to withstand the internal scandal and the investor pullout. David filed for divorce almost immediately, citing a complete breakdown of trust and the financial ruin she had caused. My parents were devastated, split between blind loyalty to their oldest daughter and a grudging, painful recognition that I had done the right, albeit brutal, thing. Clara, stripped of her brand and her public persona, initially refused to speak to me, moving to another state and cutting contact. The decade-long lie had cost her everything, and while I never wanted her to be ruined, I wanted the lie to end. What I learned from the entire horrible mess is that a carefully constructed life built on a foundation of deception is always more fragile than one built on honesty, no matter how imperfect. Even the smallest truth, like a $5 tub of Vaseline, can be the most explosive force. It has been a long time, and while Clara and I have a tentative, distant communication, the trust will never fully return. I don't regret exposing the fraud, but I still struggle with the emotional cost of being the one who had to do it. So, here I am, telling you this story, still trying to process the wreckage. The silence in my family is louder than any argument we ever had. If there's a lesson here, it's that the shortcuts we take eventually demand a full accounting, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to force them to face their own truth, even if it feels like betrayal. I only hope that one day she can see that the genuine, successful life she was meant to have was never dependent on a miracle cream anyway, but on the integrity she threw away. Thank you for listening to my story. I need to know your final, honest thoughts on this whole mess. Was my elaborate 6-month swap an act of devastating cruelty or necessary justice? Like this video if you were on my side, subscribe for more stories like this, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess and the price of a lie in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.